Hi, and welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. Welcome back.
Welcome back. We are having an episode today about vaccines, something that's first and foremost in pediatric news. And I can't wait to discuss this with you, Vivian.
Sounds good. Let's try to tackle this big issue.
Let's jump in.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
So one of the things that comes to mind when I think about how to talk about vaccines is I was on a podcast not that long ago as a guest, and the host asked me, so what has been the biggest change that you've seen over the course of your career in pediatrics? And I know that they were prompting me, expecting me to say, you know, the evolution of social media and the handheld cellular device and how that's having an impact on mental health across the board in teenagers. That obviously has been a huge change, right? But I hesitated and I was like, well, gosh, honestly, I think I have to say the biggest change over the course of my career has been the changes that have come from vaccine preventable illness and vaccinating against diseases that I was just on the cusp of seeing in my residency or just starting to see in my residency. And then the landscape of that totally transformed with the vaccines that came out in the 90s and the 2000s.
You know, and I think your point being made, I think the field of pediatrics has dramatically changed in the last 50, 75, even 100 years because of vaccines as well, right?
Right. I mean, I have this personal perspective of how it's changed in 25 years, but it's only stories that I know of how it's changed in 100 years, right?
Right. So why don't we start this episode by talking about our own personal decision making? So, Vivian, did you vaccinate your children?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I vaccinated my children according to the schedule that was put out by the AAP. I mean, not only, obviously you and I had the benefit of going into parenting with all of this medical training behind us. Like we both became parents towards the end or after our full pediatric residency. We had been through medical school and pediatric residency at that point. But I also feel like there's this principle in parenting of, I can only control so many things when it comes to my children. I can't control whether or not my children are going to develop cancer. I cannot control how much microplastic they're exposed to. There are a lot of things out in the world that are very scary as a parent, but vaccine preventable illness was an easy one for me to control. I can control whether or not my child gets invasive Hib or invasive pneumococcal, which is the Prevnar vaccine. And so that was a very easy one for me of like, check these off the list. I have now protected my child against these really terrible illnesses. How about you?
Me too. So in a similar fashion, being a doctor and then a pediatrician prior to being a parent, it was a no-brainer for me. My children all got their vaccines on the designated day that they should get them all at once. Nothing was spread out. And I followed the vaccine CDC AAP vaccine schedule as per my pediatrician's advice. And just to note, my children also still get the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine every year. Like they get all the vaccines that they are eligible for. And even now, the recommendations have expanded a little bit where you can give an extra Prevnar if your child has asthma. That has been done. I also have a child that is immunocompromised and she gets extra vaccines. When we travel, one of my children kind of traveled to an endemic area of typhoid. She got her typhoid vaccine. We not only follow the routine, we do all of the vaccines that we can get based on our demographic and our risk factors, right?
Right. I mean, I'll add to that the meningitis B for college, the meningitis vaccinations recommended for college students. Our pharmacist at the local CVS knows me because, when they get the flu vaccine in stock, I will schedule I used to schedule all 6 of my children and myself to go in together.
Mhm.
And so I would come in as this, I mean, we would be like an hour and a half on the vaccine, which
Block.
literally only took them 15 minutes because I have them all lined up and I'm like, boom, boom, boom. Anyway.
No, I have a great story about vaccines and my kids. I was moving my oldest child into his apartment in a city that was like 3 hours away. And I was with 3 of my children, and we were doing some quick pickup of stuff at Target. So we were at Target one morning, and of course, they all want to get Starbucks. So they get Starbucks. And while we're at Starbucks and Target, they realize, ooh, we can get a $10 coupon to shop at Target if we get our flu vaccines now. And one of us had already gotten it, but the other 3 hadn't. So we rushed over to the pharmacy to make same day flu appointments, Starbucks frothy pumpkin spice drink in tow, so we could get our flu vaccines and get the $10 coupon. That is how my children have like changed their view of vaccines. Not only it's necessary, but you can get a $10 coupon because of it. So,
Oh, Sylvia, I am so there. In fact, this most recent round of our flu shots, I was at the self-checkout at CVS, and the cashier offered to just check me out. And I was like, no, 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 because I'm like appropriately getting my amounts to just over $20 to then apply the $10 coupon, which I know that if I take it home or put it in my car, it's going to get lost. Like I need
right.
to use those $10 coupons right then and there. But let me tell you, it felt really satisfying to get $50 off of like $100 of things.
I can imagine. For my daughter, as we're, rolling up our sleeves for the flu vaccine, I can tell that this daughter, channels her inner me, because she actually asked the pharmacist, if I get the COVID vaccine today, can I get another $10 coupon? So this is how our family sees vaccines, right?
So did your kids have any reactions to the vaccines?
I think my immunocompromised child felt a little bit sicker, but for her, she is definitely like, I'll take this like one
Yeah.
evening of feeling sick over actually getting sick, because her illnesses are very prolonged. I personally have a strong reaction to the COVID vaccine still to this day. And since personally, I've never tested positive for COVID, I still obviously get the COVID vaccine every year, and it knocks me out for a good 24 hours after I get it. But for me, it is worth it. In my mind, I feel like if I'm having like a fever or having like some body aches from the immunization, to me, that makes me feel like it's working. My immune system is
Mm-hmm.
being primed. So it's not
Right.
necessarily a negative thing for me, but I
Yeah.
do. What about you guys? Do any of your kids have any negative reactions?
Well, this isn't necessarily a vaccine reaction, but I do have one son in particular who, when he was in those like teenage years, was definitely at risk of passing out after getting a vaccine. And, as
Yes.
pediatricians, we know that's pretty classic that for some
Hmm.
reason it's adolescent boys. And, to his credit, it's really about like your vagus nerve response.
Right.
Like it's
Yeah.
very, very much out of your control. And he's
Right.
like, I don't understand. I am not afraid of this. And he just sits there and gets the vaccine. And then I learned, because there was one time at CVS, I think he was like 13, he got his flu vaccine. And then, I had my kids lined up. So I'm having somebody else get their vaccine. And I look over at him and I see him like standing in the corner, and I'm like, you need to sit down. Like he just was ashed and gray. I'm like, oh my gosh, sit down, sit down. Like you're going to pass out right here on the floor. And I wasn't even paying attention to it. So anyway, that's kind of my, it's not a true vaccine reaction, but that's
Right.
kind of my feminist vaccine story.
So one of the things that I think would be interesting for our listeners to know about, as I remember learning in my pediatric residency, is that there is a national database or an online registry called VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, that exists for providers, pharmacists, nurse practitioners, any person that gives vaccines, to actually report any adverse effect that they see.
Yeah. So I think when I think about VAERS, if a patient gets a vaccine and they come back and something has happened, then they can report it into the system. It doesn't necessarily mean that person thinks for sure that it was caused by the vaccine. It's sort of like these two things were correlated in time.
Yeah, so this is it's an open system. It's a way of just gathering information associated with vaccines. And obviously, this central database, if they start seeing the same thing reported a lot, then it might tip them off to maybe this is an adverse reaction to the vaccines. So, like, I didn't know that this system existed prior to becoming a pediatrician. And I think in my mind, it's very reassuring to know that there's this open system kind of looking for associations in a faultless way of just reporting everything that you see. So someone else might be able to take all that data and see an actual adverse effect, right?
Right, right. And we actually have a system that does just that. So it's called the Vaccine Safety Data Link, or VSD for short. So why don't you explain to our listeners what that is, Sylvia?
Sure. The Vaccine Safety Data Link was created in 1990 by the Centers for Disease Control, and it partners with large healthcare organizations across the United States and continuously monitors vaccines after they are licensed and in use. It can actively detect possible side effects or safety concerns, and it compares health outcomes in vaccinated versus unvaccinated populations. Basically, the Vaccine Safety Data Link studies vaccination records with real medical outcomes across millions of Americans, and it actively compares risk and uses rigorous science to confirm or rule out vaccine safety concerns.
Yeah, so we actually have some recent real life examples of this. Some listeners may be aware of the 2021 COVID mRNA vaccine and the very rare association with myocarditis. That was all found out through VAERS reporting and then further analysis with the Vaccine Data Safety Link. So this is a great example of how we can use this big amounts of information to uncover any concerns about vaccines. I do want to make the point here, when the data is used from these large healthcare organizations across the country, it's all encoded in such a way that it's removed from any patient identifying information. In other words, it's done confidentially. It's really just numbers and data at that point.
Yeah, and as a pediatrician and a mom, knowing that VAERS and VSD are in place to both look for and monitor vaccine safety is really, really reassuring.
Yeah, and also when I think about childhood vaccine development and that the far majority of vaccines have been in place for 20 years now, with a few that were added in around 2010 or so, I mean, we are talking decades, certainly years of gathering large amounts of data on these vaccines, looking for anything that's indicating something unusual that needs to be investigated with these big, powerful systems that can investigate those concerns.
So why don't we move on and talk a little bit more about the vaccine itself? What is it and how it works?
Yeah, so I think a lot of us probably remember from elementary school at some point learning about Edward Jenner, like way back in the 1700s, right? Do you remember this? He was the one,
Yes.
this is still the foundation of modern vaccines, this idea of how he observed that the milkmaids were somehow immune to getting smallpox and hypothesized that that's because they were contracting cowpox from their, interaction with dairy cattle, which now we know was actually like a much less virulent or less aggressive virus, like in that smallpox family. So they would get this like much less aggressive illness, and it would build antibodies to that were similar enough to the smallpox antibodies that it would actually protect them from getting smallpox. So when this connection was made, this was like a major breakthrough, right? Because smallpox is devastating.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would cause people to like quarantine, isolate, and a large portion of the population could die because of an outbreak, right?
Yeah, which interestingly enough, Jenner is the one that termed the word vaccination, which comes from the Latin word for cow, which is vacca. Isn't that
really
cool? You can tell your patients that.
cool. I love that. So like today, vaccines in a similar way, they work by stimulating the body's immune system to produce antibodies or, the body's natural defense mechanism against a specific pathogen or disease, right? So from Jenner, it has evolved into a very highly specialized product where tests have been done in a very controlled, methodical way in order to generate the largest immune response to that specific virus with hopefully as little side effects as a person can experience. And so, from a practitioner standpoint, I see vaccines as like a superpower, a
Mhm.
developed, fine tuned instrument that helps protect people against really bad viruses and bacteria.
Right, right. And the effects have been night and day, right? Their
Mhm,
their ability to do what they were designed to do is without question, right? I mean,
mhm.
we measles was basically declared eliminated in 2000 because we had such widespread vaccination. You and I saw over the course of our career the complete shift in Hib, which was pre you and I, that
Mhm.
vaccine came out in the early 90s, late 80s, and then Prevnar, which was
Right.
during the time that we were training, which came out in 2000, right? Like these vaccines are released, they're given widely, and there is an immediate shift in
Yeah.
how we see these diseases spreading and behaving.
All right. In the second half, we want to talk a little bit more about the history of vaccines and why it's become more controversial. As we go through the historical perspective of vaccines and starting with Jenner and the cowpox and smallpox, I think a shift in how people felt about vaccines happened in the late 90s when there was this thought that vaccines maybe was the trigger or the cause of autism. I think that was kind of another milestone for the history of vaccines and how public opinion kind of changed about that. There was a paper that was published in a medical journal called The Lancet in 1998 that mentioned this possible association between autism and actually at that time the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. And from a historical perspective, this kind of planted the seed and led to more and more public opinion about this possible cause. But from doctors and a pediatrician standpoint, we know as doctors that this paper that kind of planted the seed of autism and vaccines was later found to be completely fraudulent. The authors redacted their statement, and that paper is no longer considered medically valid in the medical community. But that seed was planted. Subsequent articles have been published. Numerous large study articles have been published since that seed was planted that showed no association between the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine and autism. And as scientists and doctors, we've looked through this data and feel sure that vaccines don't cause autism. If any of the listeners are interested in looking more into these articles, I will put a link to them in the show notes so they can review them on their own.
Yeah, I would also link to the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health has a website that's called Vaccines Don't Cause Autism. Why do some people think that they do? And it really goes through step by step what happened with this study that you're talking about,
Mhm.
Sylvia, that was in the Lancet that then got retracted. It also has a link to all of the big population studies that have been done looking at exactly this question. If we look at vaccinated populations versus unvaccinated populations over multiple studies, over hundreds of thousands of children, and we still see no increase in the rate of autism between the vaccinated group and the unvaccinated group, that's pretty compelling
Yeah.
that vaccines are not causing autism. There are even
Yeah.
some studies that go a little bit further that take sort of at-risk groups, which would basically be siblings,
Mhm.
siblings of children that have already been diagnosed with autism, and then suggest that maybe delaying the vaccine schedule makes a difference, and have found there was no difference in the rates at which those higher risk siblings developed autism either. So I can only imagine that if I were a mom with a child with autism, I would very much love that there's so much press around this right now and that there are people in government that want to champion this. So I don't want to denounce that. I think that that can be a great thing. But I do think that, we have very compelling evidence that shows that there's just no increase in autism amongst a vaccinated population and an unvaccinated population.
Right.
So we'll see what else happens, but
Right.
it's so much more work to be done. But yeah, we can put a link to so many resources for parents in the show notes.
Yeah. I want to preview our listeners a little bit some episodes that are going to be coming up about vaccines where we actually have a very special guest, Dr. Scott Krugman, who actually gained some internet fame for some Facebook posts that he made describing vaccine preventable diseases.
What I love about Dr. Krugman is that he's actually a third generation pediatrician, which is
Right.
really rare if you do the math going back. I mean, he's a little bit older than you and I. And so he actually has these, stories from his father and grandfather, a grandfather who actually was taking care of children with diphtheria. I mean, when
Right.
you look at the data, they were estimating that 15,000 children a year were dying from diphtheria in the 20s. This was a major infectious disease problem back in the 20s. So
Right.
it's really interesting to think about like having that kind of personal history and the way it creates an understanding for what these
Mhm.
diseases are, even beyond what you and I understand them to be.
Yeah, right. And I encourage listeners to tune in for our future episodes about vaccines, because hopefully it'll allow the listeners to gain some of this perspective of what these diseases actually were and how terrible they were. And what a great thing it is that our children no longer have to suffer from these diseases, right?
Yeah, I think my hope as we discuss vaccines further is, we certainly have seen this tide shift in medicine over the past 30 to 50 years, where instead of being told what to do as patients, we're informed of our options and we're encouraged in this joint decision making with our physician. Well,
Mhm.
vaccines is a little bit different because the work has been done for us, the safety studies have been done, and these schedules have been determined to be the most effective, right, for preventing these terrible illnesses. But I still think there's this desire among parents to understand the
Mhm.
process and what they're getting into so that they can feel confident. They're not just being told to do this, they understand the why behind it, that there's a little bit of that joint decision making of, oh, I feel confident I'm making the right decision for my child in doing these vaccines.
Right. So hopefully our episodes today and in the future can help parents have the confidence of, yes, I want to vaccinate my children as well, right?
And for those that listen and may feel differently, we have said every episode, we welcome your feedback. Bring
Yeah.
us your questions. We are happy to have this be an open forum. Every 10 weeks we do a recap. We could vote an entire one just on the feedback we get and the concerns and the questions people get. We are happy to address anything you want with regards to vaccines. We are here as a resource and we want to help.
This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin.
We'll
We'll
see
see
you
you
next
next
time.
time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.